Well, hello, theory students. This is your asynchronous video lesson about the topic of interlanguage here in Young Learners TESOL Week 7. All right, thank you for joining me. So basically how this is going to work is I will take you through the content for this week and guide you to complete your individual task slides as we do that. Okay, so let's jump right in. Today's topic is interlanguage, which is a very important and very useful concept for language teachers to know. Inter, of course, being between, and language being language. You can think of it as a systematic set of rules that learners determine for themselves, basically. And that can be influenced by L1, L2, L3, or it could be their own rules that the learners kind of create for themselves, and that changes over time as they develop. So today you're going to learn about interlanguage, and we'll examine the learner language, some example learner language for evidence of interlanguage. And of course, I'm going to remind you to start work on your midterm portfolio if you haven't already. So feel free to take notes in your booklets on page 25 as you learn about this concept. So this is the first focus and guiding question. I'm going to ask you to jump over to your individual task slides to answer this prompt. Basically, you're going to type whatever comes to your mind. Remember Stephen Krashen. He said all we need in order to learn a language was input. Is he right? Now let me show you your task slide here. It looks just like that. You've got 3 slides and it's this grayish color. Okay, so you might want to pause the video now as you type your answers and unpause when you come back. Okay, so if this was a regular class, what I would do is elicit from you your ideas about Stephen Krashen and about this idea that language acquisition takes place in a comfortable environment where there's lots of comprehensible input, and not only does acquisition take place, but it's going to lead, following a silent period, it will lead to students actually producing their own output when they are ready. So, do you agree? You know, some of you might say, I was immersed in an English environment and I found that I got lots of comprehensible input, and one day I magically started producing language on my own. Maybe you have that experience. Maybe not. Of course, I have that experience with English because that's exactly how your first language is acquired, and that's where Krashen is coming from. But in terms of a second language acquisition process, personally, I feel like when I'm learning another language, I need lots of practice, and I enjoy it and appreciate it when teachers push me to produce output, and I can kind of track my own development. That's just my opinion. Whatever you write on that slide is okay. Now keep in mind that you're not being kind of graded on the accuracy or the correctness of whatever you write in any of your slides. This is just like a regular class, so it's all about participation. You just need to try. I'm not assessing what you put in the slides. You either complete it by the deadline for your regular participation credit, or you don't. So it's kind of one of those things. Okay, so big ideas. Krashen in 1977 You remember he suggested that input was all we needed for acquisition. More specifically, comprehensible input. And in 1985, some of you were still not born, but that's when Swain came on the scene, and she suggested that output was vital for language learning. Not just output, but actually pushing or encouraging output, what you might call comprehensible output. So what happens when we write? What happens when we speak? And when I say what happens, what are we actually doing with language when we produce it? I mean, what kinds of phenomena take place, right? I'll give you an example. We find that there are some things we can't say or write but want to. We find that there's kind of a gap between what we want to say and what we can say. Okay, now Swain was saying that unless you're encouraging output, unless you're expecting output in your classroom, students are not going to experience that moment of consciousness raising, as she put it, where they notice the gap between what they can say and what they want to say. And it's been called consciousness raising or noticing the gap. It means we're paying special attention to some form of the language, and that is helpful for learning. If you don't have those moments of noticing where you are inadequate in your language use, then you're not going to acquire language from that. So that's what Swain is saying, is you've got to push output in order for the learners to notice that gap. What else happens when we produce output? We try out language. Okay? We try out language, which sometimes results in mistakes. This is a function of output that Swain called hypothesis testing, right? So for those of you who are science majors, a hypothesis is just a belief, just an idea, and you test it out, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's exactly what Swain is saying happens when we produce output, when we push output. So hypothesis testing sometimes results in a mistake, and it sometimes results in you've said something that was comprehensible to the other person. Sometimes it's wrong. Like in this example, do not touch bread with hands, please use tongue. I feel like they probably meant to use tongs, not your tongue. That would be an example of a mistake. Here's a classic example of hypothesis testing that I use when I talk to students about this. Remember, it's just trying out language to see if it works. Well, this happens in the real world all the time. I can remember when I first came to Korea and I was starting to ride in taxis, and I was trying out my Korean on the taxi driver, right? So I can remember saying, Cha-hway-jun? U-hway-jun? Orenchok? I was just trying out these little bits of language to try to get the man to turn right. And so that little moment could be my hypothesis testing. Now, I'm going to get feedback from that. And feedback, Swain says, the feedback you get from your hypothesis testing, that becomes intake, right? So if I'm producing output, that taxi driver could give me feedback. Now remember, he's not going to turn around in his chair and he's not going to say, actually, sir, I believe the phrase you're searching for is 会长的黑就是黑, right? He's not going to say I wasn't accurate. But I'm going to know that my language didn't work if he turns around and says, huh? Huh? Or he just doesn't do what I wanted him to do. That's a form of feedback. So my intake, as Swain calls it, the information I take in is that hypothesis failed. Okay? And so sometimes we have a positive feedback. And that's not the formal classroom feedback either. That's going to be some evidence that the person understands you. Like, okay, I understand. Or in this case, they turned right. So my intake, what I learned, is that whatever I said worked. Now keep in mind, in examples like this, it may not lead to a perfectly accurate bit of language that you pick up. It could mean it wasn't accurate, but he kind of understood what you meant. And knowing that you can make yourself understandable, that's also important. So on page 27 in your workbook, it says, we see interlanguage in learners' mistakes because those mistakes are not always explained by L1 or L2 influences. And when we look at the rule the speaker is using, it isn't always an L1 rule or an L2 rule, it's the speaker's own rule. Now I want to add to that when we talk about interlanguage, it can, in fact, be influenced by your first language. So when we say L1 interference, as they used to call it, that's when you're using a rule from your first language when you're trying to speak in that second language, right? Or you could have a rule from another language that you studied, and you're kind of applying that in your third language or something like that. So it can come from your L1, it can come from your L2, and it can come from something that you just made for yourself, accurately or inaccurately, right? So you could have formed a rule in your head about English that has nothing to do with Korean, nothing to do with any language that you've studied before. And we see that learners from various different backgrounds, various different language backgrounds, they can make the same mistakes. So it's not necessarily an L1 thing, but that's part of it. It also results, as I've written here, in other processes like overextension, underextension we talked about, or in this context, overgeneralization is the term you'll be reading about for homework. Overgeneralization is very similar to overextension that children do. Overgeneralization is you're using that word too much, you're using that, you think it applies to all situations. You're overgeneralizing. It happens when we add ed to all past tense verbs, even irregular verbs. There's an example, right? Or we add s to make a plural for everything, including irregular plurals. All right, so interlanguage is a very important concept, very useful concept. It can be influenced by certain things. We say that each learner has a set of rules, a set of their own rules in their mind. It's always changing. It's changing with their development. It's changing the more that they learn about the language. Even expert speakers have a certain interlanguage, don't they? There are rules about what a specific word means, or maybe it's a rule about how something's pronounced. Maybe it's a grammatical thing, etc. Interlanguage is, very importantly, it's systematic. It's not random. It's not a slip of the tongue. There's some system that's informing it. Some logic is informing your interlanguage when you make some kind of mistake. It's based on a rule that you made for yourself. Okay, it's systematic, right? Learner mistakes follow some sort of logic. Why does just about every person say goad at some point? Why is that? Is it something the learner heard somewhere from a parent or a teacher? Probably not. But all learners say it at some point. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that the interlanguage that's their interlanguage is telling them make a past tense, you add ed. And so they're kind of overgeneralizing that rule. So it's a set of rules that they currently think are the right set of rules. Like ed works for all verbs. And they will probably abandon that rule pretty soon, or eventually, which brings us to the next point. So learner mistakes follow some sort of logic. For example, a colleague of mine once saw these leaves, sesame leaves, in a samgyeopsal restaurant, and he used to call it gaesip, 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 something like this, based on the spelling, which you'll notice in your student books on page 27. And so he didn't realize it was genip because he'd made a rule about the spelling and the pronunciation, which was inaccurate. So a kind of interlanguage in a sense. What about you? Are there any errors that you made in English or in another language? What about in Korean? Can you think of a mistake a child or a beginner user of Korean might make? I mean, there's certainly plenty of examples. Just take a moment to think about it. Certainly, in my own use of Korean, I have made a number of rules for myself. So, as I developed in my Korean, I noticed I just started putting yo on everything to make everything a little bit more polite and more appropriate for speaking to, strangers and older people, and so I started putting yo on everything. And that was just kind of a rule that I figured out. And I got a lot of feedback about it. Sometimes the feedback was fake, which is like, ooh, you can say a word. And that's not really helpful. And sometimes it was like, actually, we can't put it on everything. There's an example of interlanguage for a Korean user. Another one from my own background is I found when I was using Korean a lot, I found that I would use 나는 for everything, or even 저는 for everything. It wasn't until I became a little bit more proficient that I actually figured out for myself when it's more appropriate to use 내가, 제가, right? It's a kind of, I'm the one who will do this, and which situations to use that. So I made a rule for myself that is 나는 every time. That rule then later changed when I got a bit more proficient. The last one I'll bother you with from Korean, 들. The particle 들 for plurals. Okay? I made a rule about Korean that, you're going to talk about plurals all the time like you do in English. That was my rule. And so I was tacking that on the end of everything. Well, not only is it not always 들, sometimes but my interlanguage evolved with the knowledge that Koreans don't have to use the plural all the time. And in fact, sometimes when you use the plural, it's because that pluralness is very important. It's not like English where we really use it a lot. Anyway, So you have your own interlanguage that you developed for yourself, and that's absolutely natural. I'd love to hear some examples when I see you in the classroom again. So interlanguage is dynamic. Okay, it's a learner's set of rules, and it's always changing. That's what dynamic means, right? It's moving, it's changing. So this process is something that will be really interesting for you. A learner's set of rules is always changing. So often what happens is it's kind of in this trajectory, right? So first, you'll learn something like went and use it accurately, and then later, for some reason, you start saying goed. And then there's another process where goed becomes wented, and then in the end, you're back to went. So how does this happen? Why does this happen? Well, you can say that in the beginning, the correct form, it's not really analyzed by the learner, so it's just something that they picked up and something that they use, maybe like a chunk, or like, like, oh, this is how you say it, this is how you say it. They might not even know in this example that went and go are the same word, right? So that's why they're using went, okay. And then later, the correct form looks and sounds just the same, but in this case, the learner really knows the rules. So what happened in those bottom two? What happened in those bottom two? The learner picked up the ED rule, okay? And now they're applying it to everything. They're overgeneralizing it. And then later, they remember went, but because they have that overgeneralized rule in their interlanguage, they're tacking ED on it. So this kind of learning happens all the time. Often teachers are going to teach some of form and then test it. Students do well on the test, but then they make mistakes later. Right? They memorize, they cram for the test, they take the test, they do fine, but later they make mistakes. So often they didn't really know the form when they got it right on the test. They just memorized it. Parroting something they memorized. Those later errors are a sign of them actually working to understand the concept. So when you see the students making errors later, those errors are now rule-driven, and that's a good thing. It means they're kind of making their own rules for things. They're analyzing the language. So it's not bad teaching, it's just a normal learning process. The students' interlanguages are changing, and that's natural, that's normal, that's good. Interlanguage. It's dynamic. A learner's set of rules is always changing. It's variable. Each learner has their own set of rules. I keep moving my webcam here. And it's variable, systematic, dynamic, and variable. So interlanguage is related to this idea of social constructivism, which says that our knowledge, in this case our language knowledge, is something we create together with others. In the case of our first language, we agree with others about what words mean, how they're spelled, how they fit together, which is a process we call grammar or syntax. But we all create our own set of rules, and through interaction with one another, we align our rules with others. So this is why people in one region agree to different meanings or pronunciations. Over multiple interactions, they collectively agreed to different rules. And this is happening non-consciously, right? They don't have meetings about this. LOL. So interlanguage is variable. What are you looking at right now? Well, hopefully you recognize the guy on the left as yours truly, and the man on the right is my father. So we could think of it this way. This is my English on the left. Since living in Korea, I say take a rest a lot more than I used to back home in California. My dad would probably never say that. Okay, and this circle represents, the bluish one, purple, represents my father's English. So we lived together for a very long time, but he had a different job. He grew up in the Midwest, moved to California in his 20s, and he never lived abroad. We have a lot in common, but not everything. Even our language use is different. He has a little regional, in his English, sometimes he has regional features that I don't have. For example, W-A-S-H, I say, what is it? Say it out loud. I can't hear you. Pronounce it for me. You probably all said something like wash. I also say wash. My father says wash. Huh? He's got a little R in there. So it's accent, but it's also word choice and idioms and things like this. Now, you take me and my father. Our circles are pretty close. And here comes YL Professor Matthew Fennell, who you know. That yellow circle is his English. Okay, so as you know, he grew up in northern England, and he has a lot of different ideas about things like pronunciation and spelling and slang terms, intonation, you name it. So he came to his own rules about language with his region, right? Now this overlap where my English and my father's English and Matthew's English all come together, that's what we call English. It's the English we see in textbooks, in important exams, in academia, in pop culture, and all of that. So another thing about interlanguage is that, of course, it's variable. Everybody has their own set of rules. So as a baby, our language doesn't really overlap with the proper L1. We just are not speaking standard English or Korean when we are babies. But over time, we change our personal set of rules to better match those of our parents and our friends and our teachers. So we start to sound a lot more like the adults in our lives, right? And supposedly this is how all of us develop the same understanding of what's right or wrong in our L1. So it's not that different for our learners with their interlanguage, because over time we as teachers want to help them bring their understanding of the rules in line with everyone else's. In other words, we're trying to standardize them a little bit for their success. They'll still have some ideas of their own, but for the most part the rules will hopefully line up and agree with the ones that most speakers are using. So interlanguage is variable, right? If you turn to pages 31 to 32 in your student book, you're going to see two learners of ESL, Antonio and Chun. They're both going to do the same task. They will look at a series of pictures and say what's happening. That's one of the pictures in the background there. It's a story about a guy named Ahmed who is running late for school. Okay, so the learner on the left is Antonio, 29 years old. He's a Spanish speaker from Mexico. He studied for 3 years, from 13 to 16, has a 5-year law degree. He's been in the U.S. for 22 days. On the right, we've got Chun. She's a Mandarin speaker from China. She's been in the U.S. for 27 days. and she's 18. So, as you listen, you're going to follow along on pages 31 and 32. That's where you're going to see Antonio's on 31, Chun is on 32. You're going to see a partial transcript of what they say. Okay, and what you want to do as you're watching is you're going to look for these grammar forms, these morphemes. For example, number 1, third person singular S. You're going to look for where it's used or where it wasn't used but should have. That's he, she, it, walks, eats, jumps, etc. You're going to look for auxiliary verbs, right? So he is walking, she is eating, he is jumping, etc. And you're going to look for the copula. That's to be as the main verb. Now, you might understand third person singular S pretty well, but let me remind you about a few of these grammar terms if it's been a while. So we look on the left here. It is raining cats and dogs. Okay, that would be an example of the auxiliary be, right? Is raining. Hello, I am hungry. That's a copula. I am hungry because am is the only verb. He is sleepy, or I think he's sleepy. He is sleepy, he is dopey. So we have copulas. It is Friday. Okay, that would be a copula. He is kicking a ball. That is auxiliary, etc., etc. Okay, just a quick review. You're going to see more examples, don't worry. All right, so what we're going to do here on the first one, I'm going to say go ahead and you can watch this video on your own when it's time. Again, it's on page 31. Whoops, page 31 is Antonio's transcript in your book. I'm going to show you how to indicate this. So you're going to listen to Antonio and you're going to write what you can if you want. If you don't want, you can just do Chun on page 32 next, and I will do Antonio with you so you can see how this works. What you want to do is indicate where you see a correct usage or an incorrect usage of each of these three things. Okay, third person singular S, auxiliaries, like to be walking, for example, and the copula, which is to be as the main verb. Now, how should you indicate it? This is my system. I find it works pretty well. So if you see in the line there is something with third person singular S, then what you will do is you can just type at the end of, or write at the end of that line, 3PS, third person singular. Now if you see that it's not there where it should be, then you can mark at the end of the sentence X 3PS, so no third person singular. Now for auxiliaries like is walking, is eating, is jumping, if you see one at the end of the sentence, type AUX for auxiliary. And if you see a place where they should have used the auxiliary but didn't, that would be XAUX. And finally, our friend the copula, to be as the main verb. If you see one in the sentence on 31 or 32, you can just write cop at the end. If there's no copula where they should have, X-cop, right? For example, instead of saying it is sunny, they said it's sunny. You write X-cop at the end of the sentence. Now, here is Antonio. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say go ahead and pause this video, watch Antonio, and then come back. You can analyze what he did, saying cop, auxiliary, 3PS, xcop, x auxiliary, x 3PS, if you feel ready. If not, let me just do the first one as a model. That's fine. Second one you should definitely do on your own. Okay, so pause, watch the video, and come back. Alright, welcome back from watching that video. Let me take you through this transcript with you. Watch the video again if you want, because I'm going to give you the answers here. Alright, so we're not going to watch the video, but, whoops, let's look at the transcript on the right. You should be able to see my markings for this. So, a good way to do this too, I will read the line and talk right to your screen and see if you can predict what I'm going to say. Okay, this guy is Ahmed. What's that is? Copula. Okay, so far so good. Ahmed, try, wake up. Ahmed, try, wake up. Oop, there's something wrong here. What do you think it is? That's right, there's no copula. He should have said, oh, I will correct that. That's actually, there's no third person singular S. Should be tries. So I'm going to change that to X3PS. Okay? And you can see it in the slides too, it'll be changed. He is late. He is late. What's that? Alright, if you said copula, that's right. It is 8. What's that? To be as a main verb, that's another copula. He have to take a bus. He have to take a bus. What does that have to? That's a third person singular. Now it's kind of like a modal have to, the way it works. So you might think of it as kind of an auxiliary, but it's really considered a main verb here. So that's X3PS. He didn't put the third person singular there. So that's here, and on the second line, there's X3PS. Number 10, or, well, the next line. He don't find. What do we have here? Well, that's technically, it's an auxiliary because it should be doesn't find in the negative. But I didn't ask you to look for auxiliaries like this. No problem. That's technically an auxiliary. How about this? He is late. That's easy. That's a copula. It is far. Copula. It is winter. Copula. It is cold. Copula. It's a lucky. Well, it's a copula. It's Ahmed's friend. Copula. Okay. Now we have something different. He say the ride. What's say? Third person singular S. We should have had some kind of S on the end, right? It's a lucky man. That's another copula. His friend clean the window. Clean. That's right, there's no third person singular S. The snow no allow the sea. The snow no allow the sea. Now you're going to see some like this. It's tricky to figure out which way to approach it, right? Is it the snow is not allowing him to see? Is it the snow doesn't allow him to see? Well, I interpreted it as no auxiliary. Maybe he should say is not allowing. Okay? Again, it's a little matter of interpretation. And the last one, Ahmed is say hello. You can interpret that two different ways too, right? I mean, I said it's not an auxiliary. It should be is saying. You might say, okay, he has the is, so it's not it's a bad copula, right? Or you could say, well, that say should be third person singular s. Okay, so there's different ways to think about it. But don't worry, I've done the tricky one for you here. And on your next slide, you're going to notice what can he do? What can't he do? What can he do? What can't he do? And I'm going to reveal my examples because you're going to do the same thing with Chun. What can he do? Well, it looks like he has acquired the copula because he's using the copula a lot, right? That's, by the way, a novice level morpheme. You might remember the order of acquisition, right? So, what can he not do? He has not acquired the auxiliary. Ahmed is say hello. He has not acquired the auxiliary. Or the third person singular s. He say the ride, right? Now, is there anything else interesting we can say about his interlanguage? Well, I noticed a few things coming from Spanish. So, possibly, right? Antonio starts many of his sentences with it's. I mean, that's grammatical, but it's not used this frequently. For example, it's a lucky man, right? We would say he is a lucky man or something like this. So it could be interference from his Spanish because Spanish often drops the subject and they'll just say is, which is like es or está, right? So kind of like Korean, they can drop the subject a lot. So this could be a variation of es, just kind of interesting, or his own idea about English. The other thing I noticed is that like the snow no allowed to see, that is possible L1 interference because Spanish allows that. No plus verb. No allow would be no permite, or something like this, yeah. So that's just something interesting I found about his interlanguage, about the way English works for him. Now you're going to do the same thing with Chun. Okay, you're going to do the same thing with Chun, and you're going to see the same rules for Chun. You're going to see, let's keep moving. You're going to label each sentence in Chun's chart on page 32. Okay, and then you can check out the answers which are here. Okay, so make sure you pause, watch Chun's video, and do the chart, and then come back. All right, welcome back. So it's a winter morning. That's a copula. The boy is a student. That's a copula. He is late. Copula. He's very hurry. No copula. He is very hurry. Because here I'm saying it's copula, but it's being used in a strange way. He very hurry. Now the copula is gone, but we need to do something with hurry. He hurries. Need to be third person singular s. He want to take a ride. What's that? He want to. That's no third person singular s. He just do this. Gesture with his thumb. Do should be does. No third person singular. He and then he think the car was agree. Think should be thinks. no third person singular. The driver want, you guessed it, 3PS. So he get in the car, 3PS, no good. He get in the car, but the driver get off the car. That's no 3PS twice. He want to, just want to clean the windshield. No third person singular. You sensing a pattern here? The driver want to take him to the school. The driver just clean the window. Again, no 3PS. He is a little bit late. Good copula. Alright, so we have noticed something here, right? In your individual task slides, please tell me what you notice with examples. What can she do? What can't she do? Is there any other interesting rules that you notice about the way that she uses English, which could be her interlanguage giving her the wrong rule? So, and of course pause while you do that. So both Antonio and Chun have a hard time with third person singular S, and that's okay. Guess what? Advanced learners have a hard time with third person singular S. Remember, it's very close to the top of your chart in the order of acquisition. It's one of the very last things to be acquired, even native speakers. Neither of them really add that S to verbs. Both have a hard time with auxiliary, but both use the copula, sometimes in a chunk though. So they both seem to share rules for third person singular S, even though Chun is much better at English. So if you want, you can look at this slide. There's some interesting things here. It could be, oh, it's all from Chinese because Chun's language does not change verbs for the subject. 我是, 你是, 他是. But think about Antonio. Antonio's not doing third person singular S, and his language changes for all the subjects like English, even more than English. Yo limpio, tú limpias, él, ella, usted limpia, and then ellos, ellas limpian, right? So they're changing for different subjects, so that's not really it. The reason they're both making those errors is just interlanguage. So just like with L1 development, their L2 is developing in its own way. So here's the big ideas from today, everybody. In 1977, Krashen suggested input was all you needed for acquisition. 1985, Swain comes along and says output. You got to have comprehensible input and output. And then Long said, why not have interaction? It's a key component. It gives us opportunities to control our input and our output as we negotiate for meaning. So through interaction, we can control our output and input to make communication effective. Interaction also provides opportunities to notice linguistic features and fix problems. As you're going to pick up from the reading for homework, noticing is key. Noticing is very important in SLA, in second language acquisition today. If there isn't a moment where students actually, or learners, register that new language thing, they don't think about it, they don't notice it, then it's not going to be acquired according to some theories. So your homework for week 8 is this. Please read about your topic. I'll show you in the next slide. Interlanguage or output or interaction. Try to get the key ideas. You don't have to understand everything as usual. Everybody, please try to read pages 69 to 70 in your reading packet. That's for everyone. That's the summary of interlanguage and interaction. Make sure you're working on your midterm portfolios. Here are the jigsaw reading groups. I didn't want to put anyone by themselves, so I'll just give you a mini discussion about noticing and attention in class next week. Okay? Everyone, find your page numbers, figure out who your partners are, because We'll be doing a quick jigsaw in the class next week. Remember your midterm portfolios. Remember to answer fully. If it asks for 1 paragraph, give 1 paragraph. If it asks for 2 paragraphs, give 2. Okay? And by the way, in your very last slide that's in your individual task slides, this is a retail task like Chun and Antonio did, but this is with a learner of Korean. This is absolutely optional, but I thought some of you might be interested in this. So if you watch that video, I'm curious. Again, you can leave it blank if you don't want to do this part. That's okay. Just for those of you who are a little interested. What could you say about her interlanguage? And what rules about grammar exist in her interlanguage? This one is linked in this slide, but it's also linked in your task slides. And if you're super interested, there's a second Korean speaker at the bottom of that page who's a lot lower. Okay? All right. Thank you for your time. I hope you had a good Chuseok. I hope you will have a good Chuseok. I hope everything is fantastic in your lives. I'll see you in the classroom next week. Bye-bye.